reach back through the ages, prophets and sages, and our fathers and our mothers stalked the way. Dig down through the rubble, finding foundations on which our fathers and our mothers built a world. Explore ancient pathways, crossing continents and our oceans to the home of liberty. Rise up and rebuild now on the foundations. Clear the path so others can find their way
Hello, everyone. This is Taproot. I have with me this evening, as always, Mr. Marshall Wilson, and a very special guest this evening, Mr. Barry Holstein. And I'm going to start off and introduce Barry here, and then I think Marshall has some things to say, and we will get into the meat of the podcast for this evening. So Mr. Barry Holstein grew up in rural Hernshaw in eastern Kanawha County and has lived in Cross Lanes, West Virginia for the last 28 years. He graduated from the West Virginia Institute of Technology with a BS in Industrial Technology and was later honored by being named Alumnus of the Year in 2004. Barry also earned a master's in Human Resources Management from the University of Charleston and is currently a doctoral student in the Public Administration program at Liberty University. Barry served for 21 years in the U.S. Army and Army Reserves, retiring as an E8 First Sergeant. During his tenure with the U.S. Army, Barry held positions such as Drill Sergeant, Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Specialist, Platoon Sergeant, Civil Affairs Operator, and First Sergeant. Okay, you can hold off on the funny faces right now, Marshall. We're not to that part yet. His time in the military also allowed him to serve in combat in Iraq, where he earned a Bronze Star Service Medal. His ongoing desire to serve and interest in education led to an appointment to the Bridgemont Community and Technical College Board of Governors, and most recently, Bridge Valley Community and Technical College Board of Governors, where he is currently vice chair. Barry's professional career in the region has spanned nearly 30 years. It has primarily been in manufacturing operations management with great companies such as NGK Spark Plugs, Terramite, and Gestamp. However, he is currently employed in a management role within the United States Department of the Treasury. Barry's political activism began in 2007, including an unsuccessful run for West Virginia Secretary of State and Kanawha County Board of Education. Since then, Barry has focused on the legislative process and worked to push the West Virginia legislature toward a more conservative position. The annual Tops View legislative scorecard and report is his most notable tool in the fight for conservative values. And I'm going to let Barry tell you more about what he does here in a second, but I will mention that Tops Views, TOPSVIEWS.com is Barry's website. So Marshall, go ahead with what you have to say there, please.
Well, I just wanted to mention that Barry and I have been friends for a while, so I'm honored to have him here. But in addition to all of the accolades that you offered for him just a few minutes ago and all the things he's accomplished, in 2019, when I was a sitting delegate, I hosted a Constitution Day celebration in the chambers of the West Virginia House of Delegates. And we had a number of great speakers. We had professors, and we actually had a former legislator from Venezuela who was here, who spoke about how how important it is to maintain your constitutional republic while you can before you slide into totalitarianism as Venezuela has. And I asked Barry to close out the whole discussion. We even had Delegate Pat McGeehan take the side of the anti-federalists and argue the problems with the Constitution. It was an amazing setup, and I think that the information, the opportunities that came out of it were pretty incredible. But I had Top here, and just for the record, the reason that he's called Top is because in the Army, I'm an Army vet. In the Army, the first sergeant in a company, which is the last rank Barry held, he was a first sergeant, is called Top because he's the top sergeant in the company, not in the country. He's the guy who's in charge of all the enlisted men in a company. So that's why we call him Top. And I just kind of fall back into that Army parlance and call him Top all the time. But the reason I asked Top to do this is because he's not just an educated man. He's not just a soldier. He's also a man from down home West Virginia who has a lot of common sense, a lot of life experience, and his entire purpose in bringing all this together was he took everything that had been said before by these highly educated, capable people, elected officials, all this kind of stuff, all these people who said all these smart things. I had Dr. Stephen Smoot on as well, who discussed how West Virginia became a state in the West Virginia Constitution. And Barry took all of this and brought it down to one point. How then should we live? Which is what the disciples asked Jesus, right? They said, okay, given everything you've taught us, how should we live? And so Barry brought it all down to how does the average human being in West Virginia who is trying to live a good life and ensure that their children can live in a free, just, prosperous, and secure land, how do they do that? And I'm honored that Barry was there, and he did an amazing job, far better than I would have. And now he actually lives that out. Well, he has been living that out since what, 2007, Barry, you said?
Mm-hmm.
He's been living that out. What a decent West Virginian should do to ensure that his government is doing its job and that we are able to live free and pass that freedom on to our kids. And part of that is this report that he does on the West Virginia legislature so that we, the people, can know what our hired messenger boys in the legislature are actually doing instead of the job that we hired them for. And if y'all will forgive me, thank you for the time. Take it, Top. You got it from here.
No, thank you. And thank you for the kind words and introduction. And maybe just to catch it all up, and take it from that 2007 moment that, we were talking about is, I just came back from Iraq, and as a civil affairs operator in Eastern Baghdad, I got to work with the local communities and with the governments and with everything there. And I got to see it all kind of play out. And when I got back, it really struck me that now more than ever, we have to be engaged. We have to be engaged in our communities. We have to be engaged in our state. We have to be engaged. And so I started looking for opportunities to do that. I went to a conference, and the funny thing was I had went to this conference. I said, I want to learn how to do this. And there was a conference down near Beckley, and I went down there for a whole day training, and there was somebody there at the time, and they said, if you're not on Facebook, you need to figure that out, because social media is going to change the way politics happen and the way elections happen. And again, this was back in, 2007, 2008. So I rushed home and, okay, well, let's see what this Facebook thing's about, and got on, and I racked up about 20 friends, and I thought I was something. But it was certainly prophetic, and we've seen how social media and tech have influenced, everything that's going on. But that engagement didn't stop there. I just kept wanting to figure out where's my place in this. What can I do? What can I do to bring my skill set, to bear on some change, or to affect change in the state? I'd never been involved in politics ever, and quite frankly, if we had enough time, I would tell you my story of how I went from looking back now, I was certainly more liberal thinking in my politics and in my thought, even as a military person. Somehow that Second Amendment thing just hadn't sunk in. But the reason it hadn't sunk in was because I had never heard someone explain to me the other side and to explain to me the truth about the Second Amendment, what it really means. All I heard was what you would hear on the news or what you would hear, that which was even back then was very, certainly very left. And that realization, someone challenged me one time, and I'll dive into it just a little bit because I think it's part of the overall picture I'm trying to paint. Um, Somebody challenged me. I had a couple good friends, a couple good coworkers who were very conservative minded, and they challenged. We would sit around and have really good conversations about politics and about religion and whatever. And but they challenged me one time. They said, "Hey, look, there's a guy on the radio. There's this thing called talk radio on your way home every day. Do this for 2 weeks, and then let's talk again." And it was a guy, at the time, by the name of Michael Savage, who had the prime time spot here in Charleston. And I started hearing things in a way that I'd never heard it before. And literally within 2 weeks, it started to change my thinking and started to make me realize that, oh, it's bigger than this. There's more pieces of this, and I'm not hearing it all. So that's really, some of those were kind of the early phases of my transition and my understanding of needing to be engaged. So fast forward a little bit, I decided I'm going to run for office. And as you had mentioned in the intro, what else could I do? But right out of the bat, hey, let's try this Secretary of State thing, right? And again, I didn't know, but I did well considering I was working full time in a job that was 70 plus hours a week and trying to campaign and whatever little bit of free time I had. I ended up getting, I think, 38% in the primary against current Mac Warner. He and
that
I
was a Republican primary.
Yeah, Republican primary, right? So by this point, right, I had realized where, which party more closely associated with my beliefs, which I had shifted. If you grew up in Southern West Virginia, you were just Democrat. That's just generally the way it worked, right? Because my daddy was a Democrat, everybody, so you just registered Democrat, whether it's just the way it worked. And but somewhere along the line of being educated by some thoughtful, well-informed people, I started to realize that I really was much more associated at the time with a more conservative party, and its time again, Republican Party between the two. So I ran in the Republican primary, Secretary of State. Of course, I lost. Mac Warner won that race, but I did well. I won most of the counties. If you drew a line from, let's say, Point Pleasant down to Lewisburg, you drew a straight line. I won all the counties south of that. But
Gonna run for Congress.
right. So anyway, I really started trying to look for that niche, look for that, where do I belong and how can I participate in a meaningful way? And in the end, what I learned some things in running for office, and I encourage everyone, run for office once, give it a shot. You're going to learn a lot. And one of the things I learned was this whole scorecard
Mostly
system.
things you never wanted to know, right?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And oddly enough, I found out, because my first go around, I was going to run for Kanawha County Commission, and then ended up backing out. But what I have found over the years, honestly, everybody says the more local the politics, the dirtier. That's certainly is held true for me. When you start getting down into the really local stuff, sometimes it can get a little crazy, but it's certainly worth the effort. I'll say that. Go and you're going to learn. What I learned though was these scorecards. Everybody seems to have a scorecard out there and I'm not saying anything bad about their scorecards, right? West Virginians for Life has their scorecard. The Chamber has their scorecards. Americans for Prosperity has their scorecard. the Family Policy Council folks, they've got their their endorsements and scorecards.
CDL.
And what I found out,
Yep.
yeah, what I found out really was those scorecards don't always mean what you think they mean. I know, shocker, right? I had so many people coming to me saying, I thought you were pro-life. I said, I am pro-life. I don't know how you could get more pro-life than I am. Well, but you weren't on their card. And that's the one that really started me thinking about those scorecards and about what they're doing in the background and what they really mean. And again, I'm not trying to push away necessarily from the work that's being done by those other scorecards, but I think people need to understand what they really are. And in that case, they wouldn't endorse me. And the reason was, it wasn't because my opponent was more pro-life than me. It was because my opponent was likely the winner of the race, and they wanted to back the winner and make sure that they get on the winner side of this. And that's not uncommon. And once you're involved in government politics, I think you start understanding that. But
Can I
the general
interrupt for a
public
second, Barry?
doesn't get that. Sure.
Okay. Well, that I think this concept of the way politics works really needs to be discussed. And if you don't mind, I'd like to bring it up right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody wants to back the winner. And so what they do is they look at the person who is the strongest contestant in their estimation to win, and then they back them, whether that person stands for their principles or not. And what they'll do is they'll find an excuse to back them, saying that they support their principles. And you'll have arguments like, well, yeah, he voted against all of our bills, but what he was doing was trying to find a more effective way to win that fight, and it's a bunch of malarkey. If they would simply vote for the people who support their principles, if they would simply endorse the people who vote for their principles, who would support their principles, everything would shake out fine. But what they do is they decide that they can't afford to lose an endorsement. In other words, they can't afford to endorse someone and have that person lose their election, because then it makes them look stupid, they think, or they lose influence, they lose face. Whereas the fact of the matter is, the only way you can possibly lose is by lying, by backing someone who doesn't support your principles. And that is the way this thing works. Any group that you're a member of, that you send money to, any lobbying group that you work with will do this. They will back the guy who can win, instead of helping the guy who actually supports their principles, helping that guy to win. It's madness. It's utter insanity. All right, thanks. I appreciate you.
No, and you bring up a great segue into another point. Quite frankly, is something that I have learned perhaps in the last few years, in really being down at the legislature and being engaged and trying to be, talk to the legislators during session or even after. And one thing that you learn one thing I had to learn is there is a difference between access and influence. And many people have access.
Let me jump in again, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right, I was a delegate for 2 terms, and I cannot tell you the number of times that I sat in an office with a delegate when a lobbyist or a member of the community, or we called them amateur lobbyists, people from the community who really believed in something and came to lobby the legislature, which is your right and, by God, your duty as a citizen. But they would come in, and the delegate would sit there and say, "Oh, I understand, Mr. Jones. Thank you so much for coming to see me. Hey, can I get you a cup of coffee? Oh, this is such an important issue. Thank you so much." And then the guy would get up and walk out. The citizen would walk out of the office. And I'm absolutely certain they walked out of the office thinking, "Man, I really got through to that guy. He was listening." And then the delegate would turn around and say, "Man, I thought he'd never shut up." Now, that person had access to their delegate, but they had no influence over him whatsoever. The only influence you have over your elected employees is the fact that you might fire them, that you might get them unelected. That's the only influence you have over them. Thanks.
No, you're exactly right. And there's two very important ways to do that. One is through money. And you can say what you want, Money can win elections. And if you've got a lot of money, you can have influence. Okay. You
was
get
gonna
access and influence with money.
Can I add something there really quick? So
Mhm.
with the point that you guys were making about access versus influence, and Marshall saying that people would come in and speak to their delegate and they pretty much just laugh at them as they leave. If the hired officials knew that there was a chance that their snide remarks would get back to that person, then it may be a different story. But all of those things like that happen behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And the next thing, the next idea in the progress of this discussion is organized citizens have an impact. And the perfect example of that in West Virginia is the West Virginia Citizens Defense League. Now, whether you agree with what they're doing or not, I personally do. I started out in politics as a grassroots member of that organization, and I learned how to deal with my legislators from them. Every single Bubba, every single guy from the backwoods or from the holler in West Virginia who goes to Charleston on lobby day with the West Virginia Citizens Defense League knows which bills are up, who the sponsors and co-sponsors are of that bill, what the bills actually say, and what our position as Second Amendment advocates should be on that bill, and can speak intelligently about it. And I tell you what, it was funny to be a delegate watching people respond to CDL members who came and said, "Hey, I live in your district. I've got 4,000 friends, and we're all ready to vote for the guy who's going to support bill number HB 5287. I'm making the bill up for these reasons. And by the way, if it gets amended in any way which affects these provisions, we're going to be very upset. So vote against the amendments to those provisions, vote for the bill, or look for another job." And they would say it very professionally, very respectfully, very intelligently, but also very forcefully. And it was stunning to watch the delegates do the opposite of what they normally did, which, well, I didn't think that guy would ever leave. When the CDL guys walked out, they would say things like, those guys scare me. I've seen them unelect people before. So that's the way it works. I'm not speaking for the CDL. What I'm saying is their model is what works. They do it right.
Right. And I think you're bringing up a great point in that the second way to have influence is to be able to bring votes to bear, right? Be able to fire them. And if you can show that if a delegate or a senator is not going in the direction that you want, but you have the ability to suddenly flood them with phone calls and emails and visits, then that is a representation that you have some degree of influence in the people that vote for them to have that job.
All right, gentlemen. So go ahead. I'm sorry, Barry.
No, so one does take money, but the other does not. The other does not. The West Virginia CDL is a group of folks who are committed to that cause, and they have done to your point, they've done a great job in.
How many people does the CDL have on their payroll?
People.
How many people are on their payroll?
I don't even know if it's one.
Zero. They're simply West Virginians who believe in what they're doing, and they do it right. So I'm sorry for cutting you off again, but now that we understand what we have to do, how do we know who to target? How do we know who needs an email? How do we now, just for the record, a couple of weeks ago, Todd and I did a couple of episodes. One was how to use the West Virginia legislative website. And the next one was how to track a bill through the website. And then we also did one on how to contact your legislator. But what we really need to know is how do we determine strategically which ones specifically need to receive communications from their district? And then secondly, how do we determine which ones to fire, to replace? So I think that takes us right to your report, Top, and I'm going to shut up for a while, believe it or not.
Yeah, no, you're right. And so what I'm trying to do with this scorecard and this report is to take everything that happens in the legislative session, because it's a lot. And I'm going to bring that down, put it in some layman's terms, focus on the things that I believe are important to those who are more conservative minded, and talk about those bills that occurred in such a way that anybody can quickly look through the report, identify what's important to them. You know, if for example, being pro-life and abortion is important to you, I've got a page of my report that speaks to abortion. You can turn right to that page, and not only will you see the bills that went through this session, but you'll also, right below it, you're going to find how each of the legislators voted. So it's very clear. It's color
Okay,
coded. It's very quick. You can look down.
is that just a final vote on the bill, or do you cover, say, proposed amendments and how those were voted? You're talking about the abortion bill. Delegate John Hardy from here in Berkeley County proposed an amendment to the abortion bill that basically said if kids if babies are conceived in a way that the government deems to be improper, it's okay to abort them. And that passed in a Republican majority, supermajority legislature, and was signed by a Republican governor. So, do you get down to that level, or is it just, hey, here's a bill and here's how people voted?
No, I do get down to that level in some cases. Some cases I do include amendments if the amendment is substantive. Those are included. Sometimes, and this is another trick that you'll find, sometimes there are things they do on voice vote, and committee votes are not, you can't go online and see their committee vote. And once in a while they'll do something on voice vote based on the rules of whichever chamber. Those can't be included because I have no way of discerning who did what, right? So that's a number of years ago, our friend was engaged in getting all these votes on record, and that has been a fabulous thing for transparency. But to your point, I do include amendments, and I'll even speak to one. Sometimes, if the topic is something that I have, kind of decided is, hey, this is some of the conservative issues. For example, we had a bill that was stuck in committee, in the health committee, and it was to provide religious exemptions for vaccines in the workplace and schools, right? So you would think, supermajority Republicans, we're going to get religious exemptions. And everybody's thinking, this COVID thing, whatever, this should be an easy no-brain, right? Well, it got stuck in committee and it didn't move out of committee. And why doesn't it move out of committee? Because they don't have the votes, and they do not want to put each other on record on those controversial things unless they know for sure they're going to clear the deck and it's going to run. So they don't want to put anybody on record. Huh?
Which committee was that?
That was health committee.
Okay, which is chaired by Delegate Amy Summers, who's a nurse, right?
Yeah, and co-chaired by Delegate Tully, who's also a nurse. So the religious exemption bill didn't make it out of committee. There was a motion to discharge that made on the House floor. Now, and Marshall, you can fix me if I get this wrong, but in general terms, that motion to discharge means this bill is stuck in committee. I as a legislator are going to stand up and make a motion that we discharge it out of committee and we bring it to the full committee of the House, and we're going to take it up for discussion, debate, and a vote.
That's correct.
And right. So that motion was made on the floor of the House, trying to get it out of committee. There was a follow-up motion to table that discharge motion. They voted on the table, and an overwhelming majority of the supermajority voted to squash that bill from getting out of committee and to leave it hidden so no one will get on record of getting a vote. Now, I will tell you, and then the follow-up day, as an aside, the next day, there was a motion made to bring it off the table, right? To remove it off the table.
Which means that they would, which when you untable a motion means that you have to actually vote on the motion. And the motion was to discharge this bill from committee to the House so the House could actually vote on the bill. So this is a motion to undo the motion to prevent anyone from voting on the motion to allow the House to actually represent the people of West Virginia and vote on this bill, right? And that's the level that they get to in trying to prevent you from being represented by your elected employees.
And so in this particular case, both times that bill got stopped. There was never discussion, there was never debate, and there was never a vote on the merits of that bill. However, in my scorecard, both of those motions do have a vote and were roll called, and I included both of those motions as part of the overall scorecard in determining what I am going to call a conservative scorecard. So I did include stuff like that on occasion if it is substantive and if it is in line with the topics that are considered to be of importance to conservatives. So that's one great example. There's some other bills, if we want to get into that in a minute, but the scorecard itself, again, you'll find it on the www.topsviews.com. If you forget that, you just want to look it up. I do have a Twitter presence, so I have two accounts. One, you can follow me at Barry Holstein, or you can go to Tops Views on Twitter, and I have that as well. So once as the scorecards and things get published, it'll show up on Twitter on both of those accounts. Or if you want to follow me on Facebook, it is First Sergeant's Guide to West Virginia Legislature. So any of those areas, you can go, and you'll see links to be able to come and get those reports. So the way this report card works, and this is why it's different. And I had somebody, interestingly enough, recently when I was explaining it, they said, well, but isn't yours biased? I said, absolutely it is. I don't hide that. It's very clear if you read my report. I have some writings in there that talk to it, but it is biased. It's biased because it has my bias of what I believe is conservative. And I would go so far as to say I generally try to think I'm pretty pragmatic about it, and bring that approach. It does have that bias. So when you look at it, you have to be able to look at it, and this is why this works so well, I think, to the general public. You can look at my scorecard and say, well, you know what? I think I align with my delegate. And my delegate's at, I don't know, let's say 80% on your scorecard. Okay, it's all relative then. Then that means anybody above 80, I would challenge you. Do you align with them? Go look at their votes on some of these topics, because I made it very easy. When you go to a topic page, the votes are color coded, green and red. You can look at the bills themselves. I have very clearly define what that bill is about and maybe why it was important. And you can see how your delegate voted, because what I have found is delegates, just like scorecards, sometimes like to be single issue delegates. They want to tout their conservatism on being pro-life or being pro-Second Amendment. But that's not the totality of being a conservative, in my view. So what this does, this brings all of them together, and simply says, as part of the scorecard, you can see how I would have voted. So if I ever run for legislature, I'm going to have the most documented voting history of anybody in that legislature, I promise you. Go ahead.
Let me jump in real quick. So what is the perspective from which you come? You say conservative, but you've already mentioned that people define conservative different ways. If I may, I'd like to throw this out. I personally am an originalist on constitutional language. I recognize the amendments, and I understand they're part of the Constitution now, but I'm an originalist. And on top of that, my support doesn't just go to the form and the function of the Constitution, but goes beyond that to the principles that are laid out in the Declaration of Independence. That's what I intend to conserve. And so that's my idea of conservative. What about from your perspective?
No, I think we would align well. Um, typically when I start talking about conservatism, inevitably, and you might disagree, but inevitably I find myself also including the terminology relative to federalism. And I have found myself to kind of lay in the land of rights overlapping authority of federalism. I think the federal government has a place that is distinct in and of itself. For to secure our borders, for example, or whatever, right? The states have their own distinct and separate authority that's
Well,
granted to them.
the U.S. government, the federal government, according to the Constitution, has
Right.
enumerated powers, and the 10th Amendment says very clearly any powers that are not enumerated in the Constitution devolve to the states and the people. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting.
No, no, you're right. And um, but there is a bit of overlap. And I think that's where we have all the tension. The tension generally lies in the overlap, in which direction how much is going to overlap and in which direction. And I think from politics, I have found that's where the tension is. So back to your point, yeah, if I had to put a title, generally I put a paleo conservative title on myself. I'm more of an originalist. I do understand that, and I don't try to necessarily change the world in one bite. And that's where I also try to use the pragmatic approach a little bit, I think. And you'll see that reflective a little bit of my scorecard where I might say, but I try to call that out very clearly, where I'll say, I voted yes for this bill, but it could have been better, or here's what they really did in this. But being a little bit of a pragmatic, I'm going to side on the yes for this bill because it did X or Y. But again, I draw that out very clearly in my writings so that you can, as a reader, you can make a decision on whether or not you agree with me. And I think that's the important piece of this. The other scorecards you get, you don't even know what they're based on typically. Uh, right? They just say, oh, yeah, they're pro-life, check. You don't even know what the questionnaire was in a lot of cases of what their response was to the questionnaire. So my scorecard is not like that. And you'll also see one of the things I learned this is the third year now that I've done the scorecard, but one of the things I learned early on was also a vote is not a vote is not a vote. Some votes are more meaningful than others in moving and shifting. And we talk about this overlapping authority in sometimes separating that level of authority between executive branch, legislative branch, what have you, judicial. But some votes are more meaningful, and I have started weighting votes. And again, I clearly outlined that in the scorecard. For example, if you look at the beginning of my scorecard, it says 2.0 weight, which means this vote, if they vote on something like this, it counts double in the overall scoring mechanism. And those are things like any bill that would strengthen states' rights. So if there's a bill up that does something to strengthen states' rights and reduces the federal overlap into the states' role and authorities, that's going to be counted more than some other bills, for example. Supporting a convention of states, I call that out. I am a supporter of the Convention of States, and I call that out. So if they have votes relative to that, it's going to get weighted heavier. Eliminating ESG scoring. And I know this is fairly new, but I had to put that in there because I have found in my studies that it is an evil that's coming upon us, and so those get weighed more. Pro-life is a 1.5. Second, school choice, those get weighted a little heavier. And then we get down into like 1.2 is stuff like reduction of business licensing bureaucracy, right? What can we do to get the government out of people's business? So there's a scale here that I do use, which I think might be handy to understand. Again, if we go all the way back to your question about what is a conservative, I think even that scale is going to outlay for you my views on conservatism and what's the most important things versus some of the things that we just need to tighten up a little bit. So this scorecard, again, it fills that niche of it's not paid for by anyone. I don't have to answer to anyone about this. It's not a Republican Party scorecard. There are times, and you'll see in here, there are times when I'm very critical of the votes that were cast, and you'll see all the Republicans down the list on a particular bill are red, and I call them out on it. I call them out during session and tell them I'm going to do this.
Red meaning bad, not red meaning Republican.
Right. In this case, red is bad, green is good. And I'll give you an example of this, what I would call pragmatic approach. The income tax, personal income tax bill, HB 2526. The way that came about, again, I try to outline this a little bit in my writing in the report. You'll see it, but the voters had an opportunity through the constitutional amendment. We voted, and one of the constitutional amendments was, hey, well, we want to get rid of vehicle taxes and business inventory tax. Now, being in business, I understand the importance of or what the inventory tax does to business. I get it. But the income tax, I've seen time and time again over the last few years, they have given out so many tax reductions to very, very small segments of the business side, and the taxpayers, people like you and I, weren't getting the relief. And so I've been very critical about that. Last year, they gave away a huge tax cut only to people who own new car dealerships. Now, if that's not a cutout for somebody, I don't know what is. But what it's not a cutout for is the individual taxpayers that are going to work 9 to 5 every day. So I've been very critical of those. And when you see those kind of stack up, when you're paying attention and you see those stack up, then it's very frustrating when it comes time to enact a significant personal income tax reduction. You see them give some of that away to business that they didn't need to. The House had passed a much more aggressive personal income tax reduction bill. The Senate would have nothing to do with it. In the end, they seemingly kind of met in the middle, and it was a tax reduction for the individual like you and I, for sure. The vehicle tax elimination and a modest personal income tax reduction. It could have been more. I ended up going with yes on that, because I think overall it was a positive, but it could have been better. And I call that out as well. And I call out the reasons why it could have been better, and what actually happened in that whole debate process, and how we ended up with having tax reductions in areas that we literally, just a few months before had a statewide vote on and said, no, we don't want that there. That's not where we want our tax reduction. And then they just decide, well, we're going to do it anyway.
You not only mentioned that it could have been better, but you actually addressed in your report why it wasn't better, right?
Right.
Thanks.
Right. So that's a good example of the case where it's not about party. It's about the principle. And when one party crosses over that line into, and violates those principles, I call them out in my thing. And So if that's what makes me biased, then absolutely I am. But it's very easy to determine where you fit on this.
I
On
tell
this
you what,
scale.
anyone who claims to be unbiased is immediately suspect in my mind.
That's
Uh,
right.
the thing is, though, that I very clearly state my biases. I am biased toward liberty. I absolutely am. I am biased against government, and I'm biased towards the principles upon which this nation was founded, and extending those principles to all human beings. So,
Right.
anyway,
So your initial question though was, how do I know, or one of the initial questions was, how do I know which delegate to fire? Maybe I'm paraphrasing that differently, but how do I know which one to lobby against, or how do I know which one to start, having conversations with? This scorecard again puts it in perspective for you in a very easy way. It's very comprehensive. I scored. It just so happened they were even this year. I scored 84 votes in the House and 84 votes in the Senate. So it's not just 3 or 4 like some organizations push out there and provide you a scorecard. Their scorecard, if you look, is only sometimes it's only based on 4 votes the whole time, and they're trying to claim they're some conservative organization. They're just very, 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 very narrow. I'm trying to take a broader approach to give people the tools they need to hold their legislators accountable. And in this case, I've had many people, when I've put some preliminary data out there on Facebook or social media, I'll have people message me and say, why did you score such and such so low? They're really conservative. And my response is always, I will put the report out and I challenge you to look at the report and have a conversation with your legislator. Because if you think that legislator is conservative, I think your legislator is not telling you the entirety of what they're doing. And so it's up to you. And I'm going to show you why that legislator achieved a score of 70% out of 100. So that's my intent. My intent is to be that, I'll never be Michael Savage, right? Out here proselytizing, these conservative ideas around. But what I want to do is give people the tools, a tool that they can use that is very clear to hold their legislators accountable and to have challenging conversations if they need to their legislators. Being engaged in groups, like you say, if you're engaged with other groups, that's one of the best ways to know when it's time to reach out to a delegate, because these other groups, if you're pro-life and you're involved with West Virginians for Life, what they have done is, and where they get their influence, they've been able to build up this email list and this contact list, and they can reach out to people very quickly. And a lot of people, when someone is not getting in line with what they consider to be a pro-life position. And so the same thing needs to happen here. And that's, if you ask, what can people do to help? Go to my website. There's a place to sign up. Sign up. I'm building that email list. And I'm hoping to fill a niche that is unmet right now. Because there are times when there's just nobody paying attention on some bills that I think are very important, that people they're not getting notified, because that's not the core focus of these groups that have the big email list, right? It's not the Second Amendment bill. It's not an abortion bill, but there are other bills that conservatives care about. There's just not some group that's out here with a big email list, drawing everybody's attention to it and bringing votes to bear against the legislator. So that's
excellent.
kind of where I'm headed to get to that point.
Yeah. And I have a question about that. Actually, I noticed that you mentioned in some of your notes to me earlier that you were tracking a new metric this year, and that is absent for votes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important, because Marshall would probably be able to speak more intelligently about this. But in my time, and I'm sure you've witnessed this too, in my time at the Capitol, There have been times when I've known that there's a very important vote on the floor, and I see people get up and leave their seat and go out in the hallway and hang out talking on their cell phone. And I've asked them, what are you doing? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm talking on the phone. I'm like, yeah, but we're getting ready to vote on the floor, and this is a pretty important issue. Well, I've got an emergency going on with my family or something, and I'm like, you're not doing your job. If you just got up from your desk working at a place, or you're on an assembly line and you just said, hey, I'm just going to go take a smoke break. I mean, too many times doing that, you're probably going to get fired. So,
No, you're exactly right. And that is something that also, when you look at the report for each topic, let's say again, let's talk about pro-life. When it lists all the bills for pro-life, and then it lists each legislator and their vote on it, if they were absent and they cast no vote, it's clearly identified there. And I use another color, I use yellow, so it's very clear. Green, yellow, red. Yellow just simply means that they were not there for the vote. Now, what I will tell you is, because I've had a lot of questions about that, and people want to know why did they walk out? There's no way to know for sure, right? So I do not try to speculate why they walked out. I give you the information for you to then have those conversations. If you see on a particular topic that your legislator has missed a number of votes on this, maybe that's the question you need to ask. Why did you miss these? Maybe they have a legitimate reason. Maybe they don't. I don't try to pass that judgment. I just give you that information as a reader, as well as in the front part of the report, there's a cumulative percentage of how many of the votes that I scored, how many of those they missed, and you'll see that there's some that missed a lot. I do know for a fact some had a couple of very legitimate issues going on that prevented them from being there. But again, I can't provide that context for them without being able to provide the context for all the other ones as well. So I provide no context as to why they missed it. Simply, they missed a lot, and that's clearly identified in this report as well.
But the context provided by the fact that your report focuses on these specific items, and then the fact that they specifically missed those votes, that's some pretty serious context right there.
That's right.
If it's habitually missing those kinds of votes.
Right. And I know, with the time that I've been involved with the CDL, and we would go and visit with some legislators, delegates or senators who may be on the fence about something. And we would just, walk in their office and say, hey, we're running this bill. How are you going to vote? And they would tell us, well, we're going to vote this way or that way. And then may not even show up to vote at all. And then, then those people, somebody needs to go back to them and say, hey, we were counting on you to vote on this. And you are serving my district and you failed to do your job.
Yeah. And that's a key point in all this, right? It's being, when we say engagement, it truly is about being engaged. And it's not just a one-time. I mean, that's great. Let them know how you think they should vote, right? Because that's what you should do. But the backside of this is hold them accountable to that. And when they don't do what you're asking them to do, you need to do the follow-up and say, why did you vote yes for that? Or why did you vote no for that? And get them to give you that answer, to tell you why. You might be surprised what they'll actually say out loud.
I think that if I may, I'd like to throw this in. And another indicator here is if you have to get them to answer the question, you've got a problem with your elected employee. They should just answer the question. They should be ready to answer your question. They should be happy to have you contact them and be interested in what they're doing and to ask questions, even if those questions might be challenging. And they should answer them immediately and fully and clearly. Otherwise, you've got a problem with your elected employee, because if you're managing people at work or supervising people at work and you walk up and say, hey, what did you do about this project? Or what have you done with that machine? And their response is anything other than, I did this for these reasons. I used these resources and here's the result. then you have a problem with your employee.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And you've got to hold them accountable. I can't tell you how many times I've been down and you ask that question, and the response is, I gave them this vote so that I can get this other vote.
And that is totally the wrong answer in all situations.
Yeah. So, they're going to justify it in some form or fashion. It's whether you as a constituent are willing to accept the justification that they've given. And then, what are you going to do with that information? So I do provide that here in the scorecard. I provide all the context that I think you'll need to have great conversations with your delegates. And, the folks that sit in those chairs, Marshall's going to tell you this, the folks that sit in those chairs, they're just like you and I. All right. They got hired to do a job.
Don't you insult. They are not the brightest people on the planet by and large. There's some pretty sharp people there. I can name a couple of people who I consider to be really intelligent. On the other hand, I can name a few who I consider to be honest. They don't necessarily overlap.
That's fair.
But handful of one, handful of the other, and two or three kind of go between. But the thing is that if you have a HOA, a homeowners association, just multiply that times 100, and that's what your House of Delegates is. Multiply it times 34, and that's what your Senate is, your state Senate is. It's not a bunch of real bright people. It's a bunch of bubbas who got elected. As a matter of fact, I once actually said on the House floor, you people honestly believe that the fact that you're sitting in this chamber today means that you're smarter, you're wiser, you're better, you're more moral, you're more ethical, you're more capable than the people out there who hired you and sent you here. When the fact of the matter is, it's the exact opposite. The exact opposite. They are out there earning a living, running businesses, taking care of it. Stop it. You are not special because you're here. Do your job, represent your people according to the principles outlined in the Constitution, and be thankful that you're here. Stop it with this whole, we have to shape the public's opinion of what. No. The public shapes your opinion, George. You work for them. Anyway, thanks for letting me preach for a minute.
No, you're right. So maybe to wrap it up, perhaps, in terms of what I'm trying to do, is this all started because I personally wanted to be more engaged. And I took those steps and I said, what do I need to do? Or what can I do? What does my skill set lend itself toward? I enjoy talking to all the legislators. I enjoy having some good policy discussion. It's just what I like to do. And, I've befriended a number of them, and we can have conversations. We can disagree. We can respectfully disagree all day long. And I have no issue having those conversations with any of them, but you got to get to know them. They are people.
And I can respectfully fire you for not doing your job.
Yeah. Get to know your delegate. And that I can't stress how important that is, that if you have an interest in what's going on in your community, is that you have a relationship with your delegate. And that relationship, I'm going to ask that you go beyond sending an occasional email. Most of them have their phone numbers. If there's something going on, pick up the phone, give them a call, send them a text, or just say, hey, let's go to lunch. I want to talk about some stuff. And just sit down and build those relationships, because it's those relationships that let them know that you care, that you're engaged, and that you're paying attention. And once you start paying attention and you're willing to shed some light, perhaps, on some errors, then maybe that starts building an influence. But find those ways that you can influence, not simply access. How do you influence them? Right? I'm providing one way that I'm trying to build, because after I started sharing what I was doing with other people, I realized that other people had found some value in it. So I just started building it each year, and this is the third year. And I think this year is going to be, this year's product is a much better product than it was last year. And, so we just need to kind of work. I'm going to keep working to automate it perhaps a little bit better, make it a better tool but it is a good tool for you to use now to get engaged and understand what they're doing, and to help make those decisions. But get on my mailing list, follow me on my social media if you're on Facebook, First Sergeant's Guide to West Virginia Legislature, hit that one up for sure. That's probably the one that's the most active during session. So if things are going on, I'll throw out, I call them rhino alerts. if I see them doing something kind of like, this is crazy, your legislators are up here doing something, I'll throw out a rhino alert and let you know what they're doing, who's doing it, and who you need to call. Find those other organizations. I'm not the only one. CDL, if Second Amendment is your thing, get connected with them, because they're going to reach out to you and they're going to very clearly let you know when to talk to them, who to talk to, and what to say to them, right? I'm going to try to do that perhaps in a little broader condition, because I know, solid groups like the CDL have the Second Amendment piece. They've got it covered easily, and they're going to take care of business there. Again, I might have some differences on the tactics of the West Virginians for Life, but on the pro-life stuff, there's a couple organizations in the state that are really engaged, and they try to provide their groups with information on where to go. You'll find once you get going, there's some medical freedom folks who are very engaged, who have a group. And again, when you get engaged with them, they will alert you. So find those groups that are providing those services to you as someone who wants to be engaged, and get to know them, learn what they do, learn how they do it, and get engaged. And so with that, check me out on that Facebook page, Twitter, at Tops Views on Twitter is my my page on Twitter, or my personal one, which you'll get a lot more than you probably bargained for, on at Barry Holstein. But it's that one's probably more exciting than the other one, perhaps. But then on my website, www.topsviews.com, there's a place there to sign up for an email list, and before next session, there'll be some email lists put together. I'm not going to bombard you with emails, but I do need to have a way to really reach out to you when the time is there and I see something that needs some course correction. I want to be able to reach out to you and try to get you to engage with the right people to make some changes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Top. So we're going to ask Jazzy, our producer, to please put your contact information up, or rather the information for where to find your report and your scorecard. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. I know you're a busy guy. I know you got a lot going on. You're how far along in your PhD in public policy?
I have one more class and my dissertation. So,
dude, I am jealous. I hope you know that. I'm a ways behind you, but I'm plugging along. So I really appreciate it.
I like to think I'm close, but that dissertation is a bit.
Any idea what your dissertation topic might be?
I started because I have had I've been engaged a lot with education. Again, you would see that reflective on my scorecard, education, because I think education is so important to our state that you're going to see that there's a lot of bills, and the legislature addressed education a lot the last few years. So you'll see a lot of bills relative to education. So my initial thought was, how are we utilizing Title I federal funds to improve student outcome? But that one, it kind of started a different thought about, because I'm a fan of the Hope Scholarship, and what we've done with the Hope Scholarship is to take money out of the systems and give it to the student. So we're still upholding our constitutional requirement to provide education for our kids, but we're doing it in such a way that the student and the families get to make the choice with that money on what makes sense for them to provide the best education for that child. So the question becomes, and this is one of them that I'm considering, can we do that with Title I funding? And Title I funding, for those who aren't in that sphere, Title I funding is the money that they have allocated from the federal government. It's a supplement money that goes to the states for very specifically for poor and underprivileged families to provide additional educational resources. So Title I funding has been around for a long time, but what I'm finding is it's been around for so long, like in the 60s. It is now an entitlement program. And so the impact there might be limited, but if we can figure out a way to make it portable to the child, like we're doing the Hope Scholarship, then that might open up some opportunities in West Virginia, because West Virginia is, we get a fair amount of Title I money because of our rural, state and being a lower income state. So we get a fair amount of that. If we can figure out a way to now apply that specifically to a student to make it portable and usable in different varieties of opportunities, then maybe there's something there. So that was my first inclination, but we'll see where it goes.
Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate you. And look, I hope that we get you back to talk about other topics. Really like to get you back right before the session starts next January. Of course, the election season is next year. You're going to be electing the entire new House of Delegates, half the senators, the governor, and all of the constitutional officers are up for election. So I really want to get you back and get your take on things. Not necessarily endorsements. I don't think I'd put you into that box, but at least your assessment, your analysis of the candidates and where they stand on certain issues. And if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to get you back on various occasions.
No, I would be honored to. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be a part of your podcast and to get this information out. And hopefully, it's your audience will find our conversation valuable. Hopefully, they'll find the work that I'm doing valuable and understand that it really is coming from a place of simply wanting to help others get engaged for a better West Virginia.
Yes, sir. I want to thank Todd. Todd, none of this would happen without you. You know that I'm a complete Luddite, and just turning on my computer is a miracle. So thank you for making all this stuff happen and coaching me through it. I want to thank Jazzy, our producer. She is a true miracle worker, and she does it with a smile on her face, which completely blows my mind. And most importantly, I want to thank anyone who takes a look at our podcast, who listens to what we have to say and seriously considers the ideas here. Whether you agree with what we're saying or not, whether you think that, I've completely gone off the rails, that's fine. But if it gets you thinking, if you're actually considering the ideas of constitutional governance and the principles of liberty behind that idea, then we've done our job. And I really appreciate you for being here. Y'all take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks, Barry. See you guys.
Thank you.
All right, Justine, I guess that's it.
Yep.
Oh, Barry's gone.
That's all right.
All right. You got anything?
I think we'll probably try to schedule a meeting with Justine just to, get up to speed and see what she needs us to do. And definitely add all of Barry's stuff to the show notes or whatever, the description for this one. And I think it went really well.
That's because we had a great guest.
Absolutely.
All right, brother. I'm going to go be with kids.
Yeah. So let me stop
Isaac.
recording here.
Let's talk about Isaac real quick.
Yeah. Hang on.
We're not recording anymore. Yeah.
Oh, do you want me to record? Is this something?
No, that's great.